Ni hao, and thanks for keeping up. I trust your affectionate message in Chinese from last week panned out well. I know it did for me. This is our 6th edition of these weekly updates, and we were able to find some interesting stories also for this week. Clearly, one item to tick off on the to-do list this week is to see just how wrong I was in the non-scientific forecasting of last week, and in doing so clarify the progress overall in China's RevPAR and recovery growth. We'll investigate the 2 primary cities in 4 coastal provinces to analyze the dynamic and progress between them. We'll also have a look at pipeline in order to highlight deferred and delayed projects in the country. Our graph from last week showed actual RevPAR levels and growth up until May 18th, and I took a stab at drawing a future graph for the next week, which was supposed to end up at a higher level than the May Day holiday. How about that? Even a blind squirrel finds a nut once in a while. We did not factor in that dip, fine, which historically makes sense, but by a margin of around 4 RMB or about 50 US cents, it did surpass May Day. Well, irrespective of my guessing skills, it's another strong week, pushing RevPAR to heights not seen since early January. Last week, Beijing was able to pull off the National Congress meetings, where a main focus is the economic growth outlook. The leadership made it clear that due to the great uncertainty of the virus development and the economic and trade situation, China's development has hit major roadblocks and will concentrate on 6 areas of stability and guarantees this year, rather than setting a specific growth target. In China, the GDP level of the 4 major first-tier cities is far ahead of the other cities, and the GDP of a provincial capital city is usually higher than other cities there. But it's not necessarily always the case. There are exceptions in several provinces. Let's focus on 4 important coastal provinces and the 2 main cities in each of them, from Liaoning with the capital Shenzhen and Dalian, Shandong with the capital Jinan and Qingdao, to Jiangsu with the capital Nanjing and Suzhou, and Guangdong finally with the capital Guangzhou and Shenzhen. In these cases you will see that the GDP is higher in the second city and often have a broader developed tourism industry, more high-end hotels which generate a different kind of demand. In the case of Liaoning, Shenyang is closing the gap, a trend seen in the last few years as development and investment focuses more on other Liaoning locations over Dalian. Let's have a closer look at the neighboring provinces Shandong and Jiangsu. Shandong GDP is the 3rd highest in the country, but provincial leaders would seem less pleased about this and have been moving ahead with many large projects to close the gap. The capital Jinan is oddly enough named after a river that ceased to exist 170 years ago, but it ranks behind the 2nd city of Qingdao in GDP. Now, Qingdao is famous for many things, but the most obvious has to be mentioned: the home of Qingdao Brewery, the 2nd largest in China after Snow Breweries, founded by Germans, obviously, in 1903. Let's compare them both in terms of hotel performance. When looking at last year, Jinan was growing well ahead of Qingdao, even with Qingdao's Oktoberfest and beaches, etc. And just in the more recent recovery phase, the capital steams ahead, as you can see, well into 70% and above. But to fully understand that backdrop and see that it's not just a recent phenomenon, you need to see some historic RevPAR, where since 2014 Jinan has kept and added to performance, and Qingdao has seen effects of a lot of new supply, also in high-end internationally branded hotels. Qingdao generally has 2.5 times more high-end hotels compared to Jinan, and is clearly looking at the long game and attracting tourism and business to drive that curve north. Just ahead in national GDP rankings sit Jiangsu province, which now also can boast all 13 provincial cities in the top 100 GDP chart. Let's have a quick look at Suzhou, the capital Nanjing, and Wuxi. To begin with, these colors highlight the baseline of supply difference, from Nanjing there at the top and Wuxi with the least rooms available in the market. But when we add the growth rate, so in reality the fastest growing supply, Wuxi has caught up with Nanjing and is now growing faster than the national average. This leads to RevPAR, where Wuxi was the only one of these 3 to grow last year, and Suzhou, with all that new supply, dropped almost 5%. And in the recovery growth curve, Suzhou and Wuxi saw great gains during the May Day holiday as expected, but as shown in the higher curve of Nanjing, provincial capitals have seen a flurry of activity in preparation for National Congress, leading to demand growth there. You can't really underestimate the impact of new supply on market performance. It can both drive market demand and prices, but also create price competition. As the COVID crisis unfolds, let's have a look at hotels that were planned to start construction and have already started. What has changed so far? Before we look at delays, let's establish deferred and abandoned projects. When we look at the hotels in the planning and final planning stages in the active pipeline, so not yet under construction, in our data, not too many hotels were actually abandoned or deferred. Only 2.8% of what we had in January 2020 has now been changed to abandoned or deferred. In addition to this, 19% of rooms that were in that planning and final planning stage is now by April into construction. So things have picked up and is being built. For the hotels that were originally shown in the January report and planned to open in 2020, just over 210,000 rooms have 66% of their opening plans unchanged. That is to say, 1/3 will be postponed. In that postponed group, 13% is still looking to open within this year. And it's the 21% in purple that has already been pushed out to 2021 and 22. Due to the unusual 2020, 21 will also be an unusual year. As Tokyo has had to postpone the games to next year, one thing that happens is that it gets quite close to another major event in less than 7 months later, as Beijing becomes the first city to have hosted both the Summer and Winter Olympics. There is perhaps some early concern about that congestion this creates, which we'll see later, but on a different note, since I was in the area earlier this season, Taiwu was a great place, easily accessible on the new high-speed train, and thanks to our local hero, Baker Ma there, we had a fantastic trip. I'm very happy to go back myself. And in light of the Olympics coming, there are busy times ahead in 21 and 22 for the greater Beijing area in terms of pipeline. But remember also that Beijing has had a lower pipeline in the last few years compared to Shanghai, which is also part of the reason why it was able to grow performance faster in Beijing. Now, in the STR supply database for China, upper mid-scale far exceed other classes, and there's certainly a lot more to follow, as you can see in the yellow bars in terms of rooms. But when you look at the percentage of increase compared to existing supply, focus is definitely to more high-end in the current pipeline, lining up some interesting competition in that hotel class. If you're interested in better understanding China or any global market in terms of census and pipeline, with the ability to filter on pretty much anything while staying up to date on development and opportunity, make sure you sign up to the AMPM tool. It's an amazing platform. And on that bombshell, we're out of time. Next week, we'll look at fresh forecasts and anything else that falls from the tree. This weekend, let's make a champagne mojito and stay awesome.